Every single person in Singapore has thought about this at some point. Can I afford to buy a property alone? And with new launch condo hype in full swing here in Singapore, and queuing up at show flats turning into a national hobby, you might be tempted to take the plunge. The agents will tell you it's possible and even encourage you to stretch, while the government has rules stacked against you if you're under 35, and your friends will warn you as well about being house poor. But how much do you actually need in order to safely enter your first property here in Singapore without destroying your lifestyle or keeping you chained to a job that may not progress the way you like to? What is going on, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be answering the all-important question of how much you really need to safely buy your property in Singapore as a single. Now, if you like this kind of content, then do consider subscribing to this channel because we'll be coming up with more such content in future. With that out of the way, let's jump right into today's video. So first of all, let's talk a bit about the harsh reality of being a single in Singapore. You're unable to benefit from any of the housing subsidies that are available if you're under 35. In fact, you're even unable to buy into a resale public housing flat or HDB flat, which means that if you want to own property earlier and don't want to be priced out because, let's say, your salary hasn't been catching up with inflation, as is the case in many companies these days, the only option is a rather pricey private condo. The average one-bedder to even a small two-bedder unit is already between 900k to 1.3 million, even in the outside central region or OCR. That sounds intimidating, and even if you have the down payment to go for it, it's not just about this because it's also about structuring your down payment, your loan, and your monthly carry on the property, as well as how it compares to existing income and liquidity buffers. So in today's video, we're going to be calculating exactly how much you are going to want to provision if you're thinking about making this step. Let's get the basics out of the way, which include the minimum cash and CPF requirements, which include your down payment as well as your buyer's stamp duty. For the purposes of today's video, we're going to be assuming a price quantum of $1 million just for simplicity. However, I do understand that units in this price range are getting increasingly hard to come by, so do your adjustments accordingly. Your down payment will be 250k or 25% of that value. You also have your buyer's stamp duty, which is a tax levied by the government for purchase of any property. Once again, as a single and buying into the private market, you're also going to be ending up paying a higher stamp duty simply due to the higher quantum. This is not negligible. In fact, in this case, it's almost 25k or 10% of your down payment amount. And that already brings us to an initial starting amount of close to $275,000. Now that is, of course, only the basics. Assuming that your salary allows you to take a loan of about $750,000, in today's money, you would be earning somewhere in the range of $6,000 to $7,000 a month. Then your monthly debt service at the current interest rates of around 2% will be somewhere in the range of $2,800 per month. But simply qualifying for this loan doesn't mean that you will necessarily be comfortable. And this is where I'm going to be talking a bit more about what is going to be a safe amount of cash and liquid asset reserve to keep in order to, safely own that property without fearing for job loss or slow salary growth for the next few years to come. Now, this is actually something that I've taken from my background in banking, where there's often a debt service reserve account set aside by the borrower, or even a debt service reserve facility, which is yet another debt facility granted to a borrower to service their payments on the main tranche of debt. Similarly, in this case, you're going to want to keep a liquidity reserve or debt service reserve account to make sure that you have enough to service the mortgage, even if you have a total flame out situation. Perhaps you lose your source of income, especially as you are a single and don't benefit from the diversification that you get in a couple setup. Now consider that in Singapore, you will need to hold your property for at least 4 years in order to not incur this thing called seller's stamp duty, which adds on a lot of fees and could leave you in a loss-making situation. 4 years is 48 months, and for a loan of $750,000 at today's interest rates, that will give a monthly installment of $2,800. Multiply that by 48 and you should be able to get a sensing of how much you need to hold in order to safely service your debt and clear that seller stamp duty or SSD period. Now, I went a step further in this case to have a stress rate because you don't know if interest rates may go up in future, especially once the fixed period on your mortgage ends. And that is why I've used the stress rate that's currently being used of 4% per annum. And at 4% per annum, your installments will actually be around $3,600 per month. So if you multiply that by 48 months, that gives you a debt service reserve requirement of about $172,000. Now that seems like quite a lot of money indeed, especially as that's coming close to the amount you actually spent in your down payment. And keeping this in cash, especially during a low interest rate environment, may not be the best thing to do. Now, let's say you want to invest this cash. Then here comes another practice from banking that I would consider implementing in your overall portfolio. And that is going to be a capital buffer. Essentially, this is a buffer of liquid assets that are not only easily accessible at any time, but also low volatility that will help you absorb any potential losses that you incur if you choose to invest your debt service reserve. I will add a 20 to 30% capital buffer on top of your debt service reserve. So you take 0.2 to 0.3 and multiply that by the 172K we got earlier. In the case of 20% buffer, we do need to keep an additional close to $35,000 in liquid, less volatile assets to stomach any of those shocks. So all of that put together will put us in a pretty safe position to enter a property. And at this point, it may already seem like quite a lot of money. But that's not all, because if you lose your job at this point, are you gonna just eat grass? Well, obviously not. And that is why you do need to add on an additional emergency fund, which is of course, in common wisdom, about 12 months of projected expenses. At $3,000 a month conservatively, that gives you a reserve requirement of $36,000. Finally, we move on to the exit reserve, which will cover any closing costs such as agent fees as well as legal expenses when you come to exit the property. Now, I've estimated this to be around $30,000 or 3% of the $1 million quantum. Now, of course, this may be more if a property appreciates, but then again, if it appreciates, then that is going to be additional cash proceeds going back into your account. So the total amount needed in our example is around the range of $550,000, quite a bit more than the $250,000 that you might think is enough to buy such a property. Now, of course, if you're single and under the age of 35, you might be buying this property as part of a land banking strategy where you're just locking in today's prices and then renting it out to someone else for the time being before choosing to move in slightly later. And that might actually improve your results quite a bit here. But then again, you will have to deal with things like tenancy vacancies and higher property tax rates. And that's actually something we can cover on another video, because after all, as a finance professional working in the infrastructure debt sector, this is my bread and butter. So if you want to see that, do leave a comment down below as well. With all that being said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.